Imagine the cold press of earth against your skin, the muffled roar of a crowd outside palace walls, and the heavy silence as guards shovel dirt over your body while you are still alive. You cannot scream. Your voice is lost beneath the soil. You cannot move. Your silken robes, once symbols of beauty, are now your shroud. This was the fate of women who lived in the Forbidden City. Concubines who once pleased the Son of Heaven, but whose fall from grace condemned them to the most horrifying punishment of all, being buried alive. The imperial harem of China was a world of shadows and desire. At its height, it held thousands of women, concubines, attendants, and maidens selected from across the empire. To be chosen by the emperor was to rise from obscurity into unimaginable privilege. A single night could transform a girl into one of the most powerful women in the realm. But the same beauty that elevated her could destroy her. For in this gilded cage, jealousy was constant, betrayal unforgivable, and punishment merciless. Some concubines fell to poison, others to strangulation by silk cord. But for the most despised, the most condemned, there was another fate: burial alive. It was a punishment designed not only to kill, but to erase, to suffocate both body and memory beneath the earth. Tonight, we tell the story of one such woman, a concubine who rose to the emperor's side, tasted his love, and then betrayed him. And for that betrayal, she was condemned to the earth itself. But before we begin, I want to draw you into the story with me. Where are you listening from? Are you lying in the stillness of your room, the lights dim, surrendering to the whispers of history? Or are you drifting into sleep, letting the past wash over you? This is Whispers of History. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, so you never miss the stories kings and emperors tried to bury. Now, let us step into the Forbidden City. The year is 1464, and the Ming Dynasty rules China. On the dragon throne sits the Chenhua Emperor, a man young, inexperienced, and easily swayed by those around him. Within his forbidden city lives a harem of thousands, but one woman commands his devotion above all others: Consort Wan Zhen'er. Wan Zhen'er was no ordinary concubine. She was older than the emperor by many years, having first served in the palace as a maid. But her cunning, her beauty, and her mastery of seduction won his heart. For years, she ruled the harem, bending the emperor's desires to her will. Her jealousy, however, was infamous. When younger concubines bore the emperor children, one had them killed in secret, eliminating rivals before they could threaten her influence. She controlled access to the emperor so tightly that many women of the harem never saw him at all. But no harem could be ruled forever by fear. One concubine, remembered only as Lady Ji, caught the emperor's attention. She was young, graceful, and bold enough to defy Wan Zhen'er's dominance. For a time, the emperor visited her chambers, and whispers spread that she might eclipse one herself. What followed was inevitable. The rivalry grew, sharp glances and whispered insults echoing behind silk curtains. But Lady Ji's ambition went further. Chronicles suggest she sought not only the emperor's affection, but political influence, a crime in the eyes of the court. When her schemes were discovered, Wan Zhen'er ensured that mercy would not be given. Lady Ji was accused of betrayal, of conspiring against Wan, and by extension, against the emperor himself. The sentence was as brutal as it was symbolic. She was to be buried alive within the palace grounds. The scene, preserved in court records and later retellings, was horrifying. Lady Ji was stripped of her ornaments, her silks exchanged for plain cloth. Guards bound her arms and led her through the courtyards she once walked with pride. Her fellow concubines watched from behind latticed windows, their faces pale, knowing that the same fate could one day be theirs. She was taken to the edge of the palace gardens, where a pit had been dug in silence. The air smelled of fresh earth. Soldiers forced her inside, her body trembling as she knelt. Some accounts say she cried out, others that she held her head high, refusing to give Wan Zhen'er the satisfaction of fear. The pit was filled slowly. Shovels of dirt rained down on her silk-clad form. She gasped, her voice muffled as soil reached her chest, her throat, her face. The earth swallowed her whole, and with her, her story was meant to vanish. But history did not forget. Lady Ji's burial became a whisper that spread through the Forbidden City, a reminder to every concubine of what awaited those who defied the emperor's chosen favorite. For every banquet where they played music and poured wine, every night they waited to be summoned, they knew the soil could claim them at any moment. This was the terror of the imperial harem, to be adored one day and buried alive the next. And yet, this is only the beginning. For Lady Ji was not the only woman to suffer this fate. Across dynasties, from the Ming to the Qing, concubines who betrayed or displeased their emperors were condemned to the same earth. Each story carries the same haunting truth. Beauty was power, but power was peril. The Forbidden City was a palace of splendor, but for the women within, it was also a prison. Its red walls stretched endlessly, lined with golden roofs that gleamed in the sun. From the outside, it seemed a paradise of wealth and beauty. Inside, it was a world of silence, shadows, and fear. Every door was guarded, every corridor patrolled by eunuchs, and every concubine lived under the invisible gaze of those more powerful than her. At the heart of this prison stood Wan Zhen'er, the emperor's most trusted companion. Though her face was no longer youthful, her grip on Changhua was absolute. She dictated which concubines were allowed to meet him, which servants could approach him, and even which petitions reached his ears. To many, she was not merely the emperor's consort, she was his gatekeeper. One understood the harem better than anyone. She knew that beauty faded quickly and that youth was endless, for new girls were brought into the palace each year. To protect her position, she cultivated fear. Records, preserved by Ming historians, describe how she had rival concubines punished in ways designed not just to remove them, but to terrify others. The story of Lady Ji, buried alive in the palace gardens, was the most infamous, but she was not the only one. Chronicles hint at other women, whose names are lost, who met similar fates. Some were accused of gossiping against one, others of attempting to poison her food or win the emperor's attention behind her back. In every case, one ensured their punishment was swift and merciless. Burial alive was not an accident of cruelty, it was symbolic. In Chinese culture, burial was sacred, a rite that honored the dead and ensured peace in the afterlife. To bury someone alive, especially within the palace grounds, was to turn that sacred act into desecration. It was humiliation as much as execution. The concubine's life ended not with honor, but with suffocation, her body hidden beneath the very soil she had once walked as a royal consort. Imagine the scene in those moments before the earth closed in. The woman, dressed in plain robes, stripped of jewels, her hair loose and disheveled. Eunuchs stood around her, their expressions cold, their shovels ready. Other concubines, hidden behind carved screens, peered with wide eyes, their breath caught in their throats. The victim's cries, if she dared to make them, were muffled by the sound of earth striking the pit. Each gasp of air became shorter, shallower, until silence fell. For those who watched, the lesson was clear. Desire might bring them to the emperor's side, but one misstep, one whisper of betrayal, could condemn them to the soil. Wan Zhen'er wielded this fear like a weapon. She ensured that even the faintest rumors of disobedience were punished. Some women were flogged, their beauty scarred. Others were locked away in dark chambers, denied food until they wasted away. But the burial alive carried the deepest terror, for it struck at the soul. To die in such a way was to be erased, denied the dignity of memory. Foreign visitors to China during the Ming Dynasty, envoys from Korea, merchants from Portugal recorded whispers of the emperor's cruel punishments. They heard of women buried alive, drowned in wells, or smothered by silk cords. They described the Forbidden City not only as a palace of splendor, but as a cage where women were like pearls cast in a box, beautiful but crushed. And yet, despite her cruelty, Wan Zhen'er's power was precarious. Each burial, each punishment she ordered, created new enemies in silence. The eunuchs who carried out her commands feared her, but they also resented her. The officials at court whispered that the emperor was blinded by her influence. Even the other concubines, though cowed, dreamed of the day she might fall. Still, for decades, she endured. She grew older, yet her control over Chenghua remained unshaken. He called her mother Wan with affection. And though the harem was filled with youth, his devotion to her never faltered. Her enemies, one by one, were buried, banished, or erased. But the soil beneath the Forbidden City could not remain silent forever. Stories of the women buried alive spread beyond the palace walls, whispered among servants, told by eunuchs in hushed voices. They became cautionary tales that echoed through generations, reminders of the dangers of desire. For the concubines, the lesson was sharp. Beauty was not enough. To please the emperor was to live in luxury, but to displease him, or worse, to betray him, was to invite a fate more terrifying than death. And Lady Ji's burial was not the last. Other emperors, in other dynasties, would resort to the same punishment. During the Qing dynasty, centuries later, records tell of concubines accused of betrayal buried alive in palace courtyards, their names struck from the annals of history. The act was always the same: to erase the woman completely, to suffocate her beauty and her influence beneath the weight of earth. This was the haunting truth of the imperial harem. To live in the Forbidden City was to walk a narrow path between desire and destruction. Every glance from the emperor was both a blessing and a curse. Every smile could bring luxury or doom, and every whisper of betrayal could end with the sound of earth striking a pit. But Wan Zhen'er's reign of fear was not eternal. With her death, the harem shifted, and other women rose in her place. Yet her legacy endured, carved not in marble or jade, but in the memories of those she destroyed. Still, one question lingers. What drove these women, Lady Ji and others like her, to risk everything? Was it love, ambition, or desperation? To answer, we must look deeper into the lives of the concubines themselves, the daily struggles, the rivalries, and the fragile hope that perhaps they could rise above the soil that threatened to consume them. By dawn, the Forbidden City shimmered in the early light, a maze of red walls and golden roofs glistening against the sky. But within those walls, the women of the harem lived in a silence heavy with dread. For them, each day was a ritual of beauty and survival, and each night was a gamble with fate. The concubines rose at first light. Servants washed them with scented water, combed their hair into elaborate coils, and dressed them in silken gowns, embroidered with dragons, phoenixes, and peonies. Their faces were powdered pale, lips tinted red, every gesture rehearsed to perfection. To the outside eye, it was paradise. Jewels on their necks, perfumes in the air, music floating through the courtyards. But beneath the silks was fear. Every movement was watched by eunuchs. Every word could be carried to Wan Zhen'er, the emperor's jealous consort. A careless glance, a whispered complaint, even a moment of laughter with another woman could be twisted into treachery. The day revolved around a single question. Would the emperor call? Each night, names were presented, and if a concubine was chosen, she was bathed, perfumed, and carried to the emperor's chamber. For some, it was a night of triumph. For others, it was a death sentence waiting to be written. To be chosen meant intimacy, but also risk. For every night spent with the emperor made enemies of the women who were left behind. It was in these quiet rivalries that betrayals were born. A concubine might bribe a eunuch to slip a rumor into Wan Zhen'er's ear. Another might leave a trinket or garment in a rival's chamber to suggest witchcraft or poison. The smallest spark of suspicion could ignite into ruin. The punishment for such betrayal was always harsh. Some women were stripped of their silks, their heads shaved, and paraded before the harem as warnings. Others were confined to windowless rooms, their beauty wasting in darkness. And for the most serious offenses, those accused of disloyalty to the emperor himself, the soil awaited. One account tells of a young concubine, remembered only as Lady Ning, who was accused of plotting with palace guards to escape the forbidden city. Whether she truly planned such a thing or whether it was the invention of rivals, no one can say. But her punishment was certain. She was buried alive near the palace kitchens, her cries muffled by the earth, while servants continued their work nearby. The message was unmistakable. No wall could be escaped, no chain broken, no betrayal forgiven. The psychological torment was just as cruel as the physical. Women lived knowing that their survival depended not only on beauty, but on silence, obedience, and luck. The forbidden city was vast, but for them it was suffocating. They could not leave, could not send letters, could not speak freely even to their own families. Their world was gilded, yet narrower than the walls of their chambers. And always the soil waited. The burial alive of Lady G had left a scar in the harem's memory. Some concubines whispered prayers at night, begging the spirits to protect them from such a fate. Others made secret offerings, burning incense in hidden corners to placate the gods. But fear was never far. Each shuffle of eunuchs' feet in the corridor, each call of their name, could be the beginning of the end. The atmosphere was charged, almost sensual in its intensity. A single brush of silk, a faint smile, a half-closed door. Every gesture carried meaning. Every glance could spark envy. Women lived not only to please the emperor, but to outmaneuver one another, walking a tightrope where desire was both their gift and their curse. And for Wan Zhen'er, this tension was her weapon. She ruled through fear, letting stories of burials and secret deaths circulate just enough to remind every woman of her power. Her cruelty was not only in the punishments she ordered, but in the way she allowed the harem to drown in its own paranoia. For the concubines, survival meant invisibility. The safest were those who had never noticed, who never caught the emperor's eye, who aged quietly in forgotten chambers. For the beautiful, the witty, the ambitious, those who rose to the emperor's bed, survival was almost impossible. To be chosen was to be marked, and yet, even Wan Zhen'er's iron grip could not last forever. She was growing older, her face lined, her power sustained only by the emperor's devotion. New girls entered the palace each year, fresh with youth and hope, unaware of the earth that awaited those who defied the balance of power. One day, it would be Wan herself who faced death, though not in the soil she consigned others to. But before her end, more concubines would suffer, more women who pleased the emperor too well, who dared too much, who betrayed in ways great or small. Their names would vanish, but their terror would linger in the forbidden city's red walls. For now, though the soil was still hungry, and the concubines still dreamed of power, even as they feared the darkness beneath the earth. By the late 1470s, the atmosphere inside the forbidden city had shifted. Wan Zhen'er was still the emperor's most trusted consort, but her dominance was no longer unshakable. She had grown older, her beauty faded, and her influence, once absolute, was now strained under the weight of endless intrigues. The Changhua emperor was entering his third decade on the throne. His eyes, once fixed on one alone, began to wander again. Younger concubines, chosen each year from noble families and provincial clans, entered the palace with the same naive hope that they might rise above the rest, capture the emperor's favor, and secure their place in history. It was during this time that the story of Lady Wang, a concubine from an influential family, shook the palace. Lady Wang was not only strikingly beautiful, but also politically connected. Her family's ties to the military gave her a confidence rare in the harem. She carried herself with elegance, but also with defiance, a subtle challenge to Wan's fading power. At first, Wan Zhen'er tolerated her. After all, Lady Wang had yet to bear the emperor a child, and one had grown skilled at eliminating rivals before they could rise too high. But rumors began to spread that Lady Wang had secured the emperor's favor on several consecutive nights. Worse still, she had begun advising him on matters of court, whispering suggestions about appointments and policies, using her family's prestige as leverage. For one, this was betrayal. Not only had Lady Wang stepped into her role as confidant, but she threatened to unbalance the delicate order one had built. The punishment was swift and brutal. Lady Wang was accused of conspiring with her family against the emperor, a charge both exaggerated and convenient. In truth, she had done nothing more than speak too freely. But in the world of the Forbidden City, ambition was treason enough. Her sentence was burial alive. The execution took place at night, away from the eyes of the court, but not hidden from the harem. Concubines were ordered to watch from behind barred screens as Lady Wang was led into the gardens. Her robes, once embroidered with gold thread, were torn from her, replaced with rough cloth. Guards forced her to kneel beside the pit. She did not beg. Instead, she lifted her chin, her eyes fixed on Wan Zhen'er, who stood in the shadows, watching. The soil fell. Shovelfuls of earth struck her shoulders, her hair, her face. The air grew thick. Her breathing slowed, and then, silence. For the women who watched, the lesson was chilling. Even noble birth could not protect them. Even beauty and intelligence were dangerous if they threatened the balance of power. This was not only punishment, it was theater. A ritual of terror designed to remind the harem that survival depended not on ambition, but on submission. Outside the palace walls, whispers of Lady Wang's fate spread among servants, eunuchs, and eventually the city itself. Beijing was a city of rumor, and though the Forbidden City stood aloof behind its red walls, nothing remained hidden forever. Merchants in the market spoke of concubines buried in the gardens, of rivalries that ended in soil and silence. The grandeur of the Ming court began to take on another hue, not only splendor, but cruelty. Inside, the concubines adjusted their lives accordingly. Some withdrew, choosing silence over ambition. Others grew more cunning, learning how to flatter Wan Zhen'er, while quietly seeking the emperor's attention. It was a delicate game, one that demanded endless calculation. Every word, every smile, every gesture was weighed for its risk. Wan, meanwhile, clung to her power with desperation. She could no longer rely on beauty, so she turned increasingly to fear. Burials, floggings, confinements. Each punishment reminded the women that her hand still held the whip. Yet, for all her cruelty, the cracks were beginning to show. The Chenghua emperor, though still attached to her, began to tire of the endless tension within his harem. Officials at court whispered of his neglect of state affairs, blaming Wan's influence. Her enemies in the bureaucracy grew bolder, gathering evidence of her interference, her jealousies, her crimes, and still women died. The burial alive of Lady Wang marked one of the last great punishments of Wan's reign. It was the clearest example of how far she would go to protect her throne in the harem, even as her grip weakened. But Wan Zhen'er's story was not only about cruelty, it was also about survival. She had lived decades in the most dangerous place in China, the emperor's side, and endured when so many others had been erased. Yet her survival came at a terrible cost. The blood and breath of women buried beneath the palace earth. The soil of the Forbidden City had consumed many. But Wan's end would come not from her rivals in the harem, nor from the women she had buried, but from the natural passing of years. When she finally died, she was honored with titles and memorials, while the women she destroyed remained nameless, their bones hidden in unmarked graves. For the harem, her death marked both an end and a beginning. New favorites would rise, new rivalries would be born, and new punishments would stain the palace grounds. The cycle would continue, for the system itself demanded it. Yet Lady Ji, Lady Ning, Lady Wang, Though erased in name, they lingered in memory in whispers, carried by eunuchs and servants in the haunting fear that every concubine carried as she laid her head on her pillow at night. And the soil was never far. When Wan Zhen'er finally passed from the world, her power ended, but the soil of the Forbidden City did not rest. The practice of burial alive was not her invention. It had been used before her, and it would continue after her. A punishment reserved for women who were accused not merely of jealousy or insolence, but of betrayal, ambition, or dishonor against the emperor himself. The Ming Dynasty was riddled with such stories, each one buried deep in the chronicles, mentioned in passing but heavy with implication. Some were recorded bluntly, others veiled in euphemism. She was put to earth, she met her end in silence. These phrases, innocuous to the casual reader, meant one thing: live burial. The Jiujing emperor, who came after Chen Hua, was notorious for his harshness toward women in his harem. He filled the Forbidden City with Taoist alchemists, searching for elixirs of immortality, and subjected his concubines to strange rituals meant to feed his spiritual power. Those who resisted, even slightly, faced unspeakable punishments. One record tells of concubines beaten and starved, while others were buried alive for refusing to take part in his rituals of blood and sacrifice. In one chilling incident, a group of concubines, desperate and broken, attempted to strangle him in his sleep with a silk cord. Their plot failed. The punishment was merciless. Most were executed, but a select few were buried alive in the palace grounds, their bodies consigned to earth as a warning. The soil was not just punishment, it was humiliation, a way of erasing women who had dared to raise their hands against the Son of Heaven. The practice extended into the Qing dynasty centuries later. Though the Qing emperors ruled with different traditions, the logic of the harem remained unchanged. Concubines lived in luxury but at constant risk. During the early Qing, under the Shunzi emperor, a favored concubine known as Consort Wan Zhen'er died young. Though she was honored in death, the women accused of plotting against her were not so fortunate. Some were executed. Others, according to whispers, were buried alive in the palace gardens. Why burial? Why not simple execution? The answer lies in symbolism. In imperial China, burial was sacred, a passage into the afterlife that ensured rest. To be buried alive was to twist that sacred act into an act of terror. It was to suffocate not only the body but the soul, to deny the victim peace. In a world where honor after death mattered as much as life itself, this was the ultimate humiliation. Imagine, for a moment, the silence after such an act. The pit filled, the shovels thrown aside, the guards walking away. The earth smoothed over as if nothing had happened. The concubine's chamber was stripped, her belongings burned, her name erased from records. To the outside world, she had never existed. To the harem, her absence was louder than any scream. Servants whispered. Eunuchs carried stories in hushed tones. Concubines, lying awake in their chambers, pressed their hands against their silk sheets and imagined the weight of earth pressing down instead. For every flute that played, every banquet that sparkled with jewels and wine, the soil beneath the Forbidden City hid its own darkness. But the most haunting truth was this: not every concubine punished by burial was guilty. In many cases, they were victims of palace intrigue, framed by rivals, sacrificed to preserve the emperor's peace of mind, or silenced because they knew too much. Beauty and ambition made them targets. Loyalty did not save them. One Qing record tells of a concubine who dared to complain of the emperor's neglect. She was accused of disrupting harmony, and swiftly condemned. Buried alive, her voice was silenced forever, but her defiance lived on in the whispered stories of her sisters. The act of burial alive also shaped the psychology of the harem. Fear became a constant companion. Concubines learned not to speak too loudly, not to laugh too freely, not to weep too openly. Their beauty was their cage, and silence their survival. And yet, for all the cruelty, there was a twisted intimacy in these punishments. The emperor was not a distant executioner. He often ordered such fates personally, his word sealing the soil over a woman he had once held in his arms. The same hands that had caressed silks and poured wine for him were now bound behind a concubine-s back as the earth swallowed her. Desire and death were bound together, inseparable. This, too, was part of the message. To please the emperor was dangerous. To betray him, or to even seem as though you had, was fatal. Love, lust, and power blurred into punishment, until the line between intimacy and cruelty was almost invisible. By the 17th century, the soil of the Forbidden City had consumed many women, their stories lost beneath the grandeur of the Ming and Qing courts. Their graves were unmarked, their names erased. Only fragments of their lives survived, brief notes in chronicles, half-whispered legends, and the ever-present fear that their fate could become anyone's fate. The harem lived with this truth. Each concubine was a flower in a gilded vase, admired for a moment, then discarded into the earth when her petals began to fade. And still, they hoped. For every burial, every silenced scream, new girls arrived, fresh with ambition. They saw the jewels, the silks, the power, and believed they might succeed where others had failed. They did not see the soil until it was too late. The Forbidden City glimmered with gold, but its splendor masked an unspoken terror. Every concubine who walked its marble courtyards lived in the shadow of those who had been swallowed by the earth. The soil was more than a grave. It was a memory, a warning, and a presence that lingered like a ghost. For the women inside the harem, life was a theater of silence. They learned early that every word could betray them. Eunuchs reported the smallest whispers, and rivals twisted laughter into mockery or tears into insolence. The threat of burial alive was always in the air, invisible but never forgotten. Imagine lying on a silk bed, the lanterns dim, waiting for the summons that might never come. Outside, cicadas cry in the night, and the faint shuffle of guards echoes down the corridors. You close your eyes, but sleep does not come. Instead, you imagine the sound of earth falling, shovelful after shovelful, until even your breath is gone. It was not just death they feared, it was erasure. In Chinese tradition, names carried weight. Names ensured memory. Ancestors were worshipped, descendants honored. To be buried alive, your name erased, your chamber stripped, your possessions burned. This was not only execution, it was annihilation. A life lived as if it had never been. Concubines spoke of this in whispers, often disguised as stories for younger girls entering the palace. A newcomer might arrive, her eyes wide with wonder at the gilded halls, and an older concubine would lean close, murmuring, "Do not laugh too loudly, do not look too long at him. Remember Lady Ji, remember Lady Wang, the earth still remembers them." The psychological pressure was immense. Many women withdrew into themselves, choosing invisibility over ambition. They lived quietly, performing rituals, embroidering, reciting poetry, waiting for years in chambers the emperor never entered. To be forgotten was bitter, but it was safer than being noticed and condemned. Others chose a different path. Submission, they smiled when told, wept when commanded, obeyed without question. Their survival depended on convincing Wan Zhen'er, or later consorts, that they were no threat. To live, they had to shrink. Yet ambition could never be fully silenced. For every concubine who hid in the shadows, another risked everything for the emperor's gaze. She painted her lips brighter, composed verses to please him, bribed eunuchs to carry her messages. These women knew the soil might claim them, but the hope of power, of being remembered, burned stronger than fear. The memory of burials alive also created a strange intimacy between the women. They competed, but they were bound together by the same dread. Some prayed together at hidden shrines, others exchanged small tokens, hairpins, embroidered cloths, as secret pledges of loyalty. Yet trust was fragile. The same woman who clasped your hand in comfort might be the one to whisper your name into Wan Zhen'er's ear tomorrow. The eunuchs, too, were part of this world of fear. They dug the pits, bound the arms, threw the shovelfuls of earth. But they also carried the stories, spreading the whispers through the palace. Some pitied the concubines, others relished their suffering, but all knew that each burial tightened Wan's grip and darkened the emperor's reign. Beyond the palace walls, Beijing carried its own echoes of these stories. Merchants in the markets repeated tales of women buried alive. Mothers warned daughters, comparing the emperor's harem to a garden of flowers trampled underfoot. The people admired the grandeur of the dynasty, but shuddered at the cruelty hidden behind its walls. Inside the Forbidden City, the fear of burial alive shaped daily rituals. Concubines left offerings of incense and fruit at shrines for protection. They prayed not for power, but for survival. Some wrote poems in secret, lamenting their captivity and the terror of the soil. Those verses, if discovered, could themselves be evidence of betrayal. There are records of women who dreamed night after night of suffocation. Dreams where they clawed at the earth, calling for help that never came. In the language of the court, these were omens of disfavor, but in truth, they were the scars of trauma carried by women who lived one breath away from death. The soil became a metaphor in the harem. To fall to the earth meant to lose favor, to be erased. To rise above the earth was to survive another day, another season, another year. But everyone knew, no matter how high they rose, the soil always waited. And so, the Forbidden City was not only a palace of beauty and power, it was a living tomb, where each concubine carried her own funeral within her heart. As dynasties rose and fell, the cycle repeated. Ming gave way to Qing, yet the system of fear endured. The emperors changed, the names of the women changed, but the silence of burial alive remained. The concubines knew that their lives were fragile, their futures uncertain, and their names fleeting. They knew that every banquet might be their last, every night with the emperor the moment their rivals marked them for death. The soil of the Forbidden City was never far. By the time Wan Zhen'er drew her final breath in 1487, she had outlived countless rivals. She was buried with honor, remembered in imperial chronicles as a loyal consort, who had guided the Chenhua emperor's reign. Her mausoleum was decorated with silks and jade, her name preserved in ancestral records. To history, she was Consort Wan, a figure of influence and devotion. But beneath the palace soil, the women she destroyed lay nameless. Lady Ji, Lady Ning, Lady Wang, and others whose names never even entered the scrolls, had been swallowed by the earth, their voices silenced, their stories cut off mid-sentence. This was the cruel paradox of the Forbidden City. The powerful were remembered, the victims erased. Yet memory has a way of resisting silence. Though the official histories honored one, the whispers of servants, eunuchs, and common people told another tale, of jealousies that ended in soil, of women buried alive for nothing more than ambition or defiance. And these whispers endured. The Ming Dynasty eventually collapsed, replaced by the Qing. New emperors ruled. New women filled the harem, but the soil beneath the Forbidden City remained heavy with memory. Every concubine who entered its gates knew the stories. They may not have known the names, but they knew the fate. The tales of burial alive became part of the very air of the palace, a legend that haunted each generation. Even in later centuries, when European envoys were allowed glimpses of the Forbidden City, they remarked on the eerie silence of the women within. They saw their beauty, their jewels, their silks, but also their stillness, their measured steps, their cautious eyes. They did not see women free to laugh or speak, but flowers frozen in glass, fragile and afraid. That fear was the legacy of the soil. The story of these women is not only about punishment, but about power, and how power corrupts even the most intimate of bonds. The emperor's love could elevate a girl from obscurity into unimaginable luxury. But the same love, soured by suspicion, could condemn her to burial alive. Desire and death were inseparable in the harem. To please the emperor was to live in danger. To betray him, or even to seem to betray him, was to vanish beneath the earth. And what of Wan Zhen'er herself? She survived longer than most, yet her legacy is as dark as it is enduring. Some historians see her as a ruthless villain, others as a woman trapped in the same cruel system, forced to wield fear as her only shield. She had no sons to secure her place, no dynasty of her own to carry her name. Her memory survives not because of her love, but because of her cruelty. The soil she commanded became the shadow that defines her even now. The women she buried, though forgotten by official histories, live on in another way. They are remembered not in names but in symbols, in the cautionary tales whispered across centuries, in the warnings that echoed through Chinese folklore, that beauty can be fatal, that favor is fragile, that betrayal is punished not only with death but with erasure. And so, the Forbidden City stands today as a monument to both splendor and silence. Tourists walk its courtyards, marvel at its painted beams, its dragon-carved thrones, its endless halls of red and gold. Few stop to wonder about the earth beneath their feet, the soil that may still hold the bones of forgotten concubines, buried alive for sins real or imagined. The silence of that soil is louder than any trumpet of victory, louder than any song of court musicians. It is the silence of women erased by power. Imagine, for a moment, standing in one of those courtyards at night. The lanterns are dark, the corridors empty. You hear the faint rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind against stone. And beneath you in the soil lies the memory of women who once laughed, once sang, once loved, and then were swallowed by the earth. They are gone, but their story lingers. And that is why we tell it now. Because history often remembers kings, emperors, and consorts, those who commanded armies or ruled empires. But true history also belongs to the forgotten, the silenced, the erased. The concubines buried alive for betraying the emperor remind us that power is never only glory. It is cruelty, fear, and the endless struggle of those trapped beneath it. These women may have been meant to vanish, their names unrecorded, their lives erased. But tonight, in these whispers of history, they rise again. So, as you drift into sleep, remember the soil of the Forbidden City, remember the silence it held, and remember the women whose voices were taken, but whose fate still speaks across centuries. This was their story.